You know Nick Robinson. I don't have to even do an introduction. So, Nick, what should we talk about then? Anything happened today?
As if only there was something happening.
Yeah, I know.
There's nothing topical at all. We talk about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah,
we can talk about...
Are we going on holiday anywhere? Nothing like that?
I've actually spent today, Simon, slightly regretting the fact that I have for months been saying to people that what looked as though might happen might well not happen. Because I thought there was such a kind of sense of people saying he's got to go and he's going to go, that I was constantly putting the counter-argument. But it seemed to me that the person who's really delivered the fatal blow to Boris Johnson appears to have been Boris Johnson. Because his utter lack of contrition and his total unwillingness to compromise.
So when we say over the brink, do you think he's going to take a step forward tonight, or...?
Well, I mean, it seems as though, I've left the phone there just so that we can all be up to date.
I think they'll tell you.
I genuinely think, look, by every normal measure of politics, he's gone. He's over. And he was ages ago.
Yeah.
Why hasn't he been, and why is it still kind of a live question tonight? Which is... The answer is simple, which is the Tory party has not had an alternative that they're comfortable with. And that is partly a compliment to him, a sense that he has this sort of unique charisma which makes him effective at reaching the voters, as the Tories contemplate the fact they need to win a fifth election during a major financial crisis. And partly as a reflection on the fact that they don't, post-Brexit, haven't come to any sort of agreement about what they believe. I mean, what is really striking, I think, if we could get away from the blooming personalities, is that there is no post-Brexit plan for Britain. There is neither a Brexiteers' Brexit plan for Britain, which would be Singapore on Thames, low tax, low regulation, compete with Europe by proving that you can have more innovation here, you can attract companies in with lower tax rates, you can find sectors, whether it's biotech or whether it's technology more generally, whether it's financial products, that the EU won't allow you to do, so that you use all the potential advantages of Brexit to go. Or an entirely alternative view, which is we're in a new era of higher taxes, higher spending and higher borrowing, but the Tories can occupy the ground. They just haven't had that debate. Mm-hmm. So then not anywhere in particular.
Okay. Now, just to warn the audience, so I'm very short-sighted, so if I put my glasses on, it means I'm looking to take questions from you. And if I take them off, it means that I'm not. So that's the code we have, okay? We're all in on that deal. Okay, good. So now, we have to talk a bit about Boris and his personality. We do, because it's such fun to talk about him. But I want to play, first of all, a little round of you. We've got a couple of quizzes for you.
Right.
I know you like these political quizzes, because you told me you do. So we've got to play Spot the PM. All right?
Yes.
So, Spot the PM. So, who is the PM we're talking about here? So, I quote, "The lamentable ignorance, indifference of the Foreign Secretary regime. He never studies his papers. He never knew the facts at the cabinet. He had seldom read the morning's Foreign Office telegrams and never ahead of time. He trusted to his unequal powers of improvisation to take him through any trouble and enable him to leap lightly from one crisis to another."
This is a description of a Prime Minister.
This is a description of a Foreign Secretary who would become Prime Minister.
Sorry, it's the Foreign Secretary put me off because I initially thought you were going to say Churchill.
No, it's not Churchill. No. Foreign Secretary is going to become Prime Minister. And it's written by a grandee.
Was it Eden?
It's not Eden, no, you're going the wrong direction.
Oh, my God.
You've got to go backwards.
Much further back.
A bit further back.
We're not going to Salisbury or something.
Not as far back as that. We're getting there. You're warming in.
Help me out.
It's Balfour.
Right.
It's Balfour, okay. But it's obviously also Boris, isn't it? It's clearly and obviously Boris. It's actually written by Curzon, who was the Chancellor of Oxford University. We may come back to that.
Very good quote.
I know, it's good, isn't it? I know, it took me ages to find
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Thank
you. But would you say then that, however, all of these things are not, all of Boris's personality characteristics are not new in politics? He's not unique, is he?
No, I don't think he's unique at all, actually. I think there have long been people, and whether you take sort of, as it were, I mean, he's not a drinker. Churchill was a drinker. There have been lots of very successful people, but he isn't a drinker, actually. The irony of the whole row about parties is I suspect if he was there, he had one glass. He should never been and isn't now a heavy drinker. So, but there have been people who are. He is clearly, in old speak, a philanderer, but there have been plenty of those from Lloyd George and many others besides. But if you're talking about casual with his paperwork, in that sense, yes, there have been plenty of politicians, and in a sense, politics attracts. It's part of the interesting psychology of politics, isn't it? Is that it attracts its fair share of chancers and performers and show-offs. And therefore, no, it isn't unusual. I think what makes him unusual in my adult lifetime is the combination of this extraordinary celebrity appeal. And let's not forget, because we're talking at a time when, as it were, everybody thinks it's time to kick Boris Johnson. His power to reach the electorate was extraordinary. He is a major celebrity. You travel with him, people want to be with him, they want to see him, they want to kind of talk to him. And until quite recently, he was very popular as a result of that, albeit a divisive figure because of Brexit. But if you go before Brexit, he was extraordinarily popular. My own father-in-law, a GP, would be touched to see me here if they prefer me to be at the Royal College of GPs, of course.
Don't say that. My wife will be intolerable.
But I only mentioned him because he passionately opposed the Conservatives. Boris Johnson was his local MP and was absolutely wooed by this guy. So remember that skill set. It's easy to forget it. But it seems to me what's done for him in the end is what he does to other people. That's what's done for him. It isn't the lack of doing the paperwork that's done him. It's not the lack of detail that's done him. It is the fact that you come into contact with him and he destroys you.
Yeah, I mean, that's coming up. So let's expand that a little bit. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit, well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about, do politicians get the press they deserve? And the general view, I think often they don't. But most people, tend to say, they're all rubbish. But the more you get to know politicians, they're actually perfectly charming, often very funny people.
Yep.
But Boris seems to be the opposite. The people who really know him often loathe him. The people who, whereas people like me who haven't met him once, but remember him from Have I Got News for You, things like that, think he would be really fun to sit next to on a long flight to California. Which is my test of character.
This is partly because, believe it or not, he's shy.
Yeah.
He is like, it's often said of many comics are depressives, comics are, great on the stage. He's shy and he's awkward, except when he's performing. Now, most of the time you see him, he's performing.
Yeah.
But he's not at ease when he's not. I went to one day this bloody photograph will come out. I went to an extraordinary dinner in the lead up to the referendum where somebody who'd been president of the Oxford Union had that sort of desire to let's get all the ex-presidents from my time together for dinner. Now, I was not a president of the Oxford Union.
We're going to find that out.
In fact, run to be president of the Oxford Union. But I was at Oxford at that time and did a lot of debating at the Oxford Union. And it was a curious dinner because there were the leaders of the Remain campaign in the same room as Boris, who arrived, you will be surprised today, ladies and gentlemen, very late. Everybody got on very well, but he was the awkward presence in the room. He was the one who didn't, for the purposes of an evening of 10 people you knew from 30 years ago, relax.
And there's no picture of this?
Not one that you're having.
All right. Well, now you've mentioned this now, because, I mean, we're not running in any particular order here. We've already gone way off piece, and I just give up. But in terms of it all begins, there's a book, as you know, just come out called The Chumocracy, what's it called? Yeah. So it all begins at Oxford. And let's have a look at a picture, shall we? So
we have to.
Let's have a look at a picture. So can we have our picture up, please? There. Now then. Yeah, I know.
Don't recognise any of them.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Now, but I'll tell you, our guide to this picture is because I thought your wife was going to be here, actually, but she's in the picture, isn't she?
She is. She's on the back row.
She's on the back row, okay. Now, most of you from the audience, but you can pick out Boris, I think. You can pick out Boris from where you're seeing it. Where's Boris? Where is Boris? That's right. But there's another person, so Sally. We also have here Sally Marlowe, who's on this picture. So where's Sally? Where are you? Sally, tell us a little bit about, we'll give Nick a rest for a moment. Why are you on that picture? And Sally's my colleague at the Institute of Psychiatry. Why are you on that picture?
Because, like Nick, I was involved with the Oxford Union, and like Nick, I didn't go into politics afterwards, but several of the people on this photograph did. So, thinking about when this was taken, I can't remember, Nick, what were you on standing?
No, I funnily enough, I never held office at all at the Oxford Union. This was the chap in the middle that will tell you, Neil Sherlock, was president of the Oxford Union.
Right.
Chap with the ginger hair in the middle. He is the last person to beat Boris Johnson in an election. He's very proud of it. He went on to have a career advising Liberal Democrat leaders, Paddy Ashdown and Nick Clegg and others. And he invited me just because he wanted me to be there, because I did a lot of speaking for him. But and in his period. But that's why I'm there.
So I was there because I was on what was known as the Standing Committee, which was kind of the thing before you ran for office. But if you look on that photo, there's Radek Sikorski, who was Foreign Minister of Poland.
Mm-hmm.
There's Roland Radi, but far be it from me, Nick, to guess that he was hosting the dinner that you just...
Actually, he wasn't, but he was there.
Right, because he ran a Remain group during Brexit. You've got Cameron O'Reilly, who's Tony O'Reilly's son. So there's some, and then you've got Gareth Penny, who ran De Beers in South Africa.
Yep.
So you've got some big hitters in that photo.
This is true.
And it could have been you.
Could have been me doing which?
You could have made something of yourself.
No, if only. If only.
You could. But, okay, so I think that's a great picture. We enjoyed it. But,
yeah.
So the thesis...
It's just me with hair is the thing I enjoyed.
Yes.
You had loads of
I did indeed have a lot of hair. Yeah, that is true.
And indeed, your contemporaries quoted that you debated a lot at the Oxford Union, that the three stars were Simon Stevens, who's we've interviewed,
yes,
Michael Gove, who we haven't, and now you, who we have. But the three of you were singled out as being the best debaters of the generation. Not Boris, actually, in that list, but he was, I'm told, very good.
I don't normally reveal private text, but for your amusement, when this book came out, and in the way one does, you get an early copy and check the index.
Yeah, of course.
The first text I got was from one Michael Gove saying, at least they're right about the three best debaters in Oxford.
Now, but, I mean, the serious point he's making, I've forgotten what the author's called now. What was he called?
Simon Cooper.
That's right, Cooper. Is that he said that if Boris, Dan Hannan, Gove and a couple of others had been rejected by Oxford, I think Cummings was mentioned as well, there would be no Brexit, because he says it all begins there.
I don't think that's right.
Tell us why not.
Well, look, the book, ladies and gentlemen, the book Chums is a really good read, and Simon Cooper is a bloody good journalist, and has written about lots of other subjects, incidentally very powerfully, like football, for example. So there's one thesis which I think is powerful, and frankly, as I read it, made me feel quite self-reflective and quite uncomfortable, which is basically that we as a country have, for some reason, placed far too higher value on articulacy. And that the chain that goes private school, Oxford tutorial system, PPE, and Oxford Union, and those are three aspects of Oxford, they are different but all, as it were, complementary, have given vast power to people who can talk.
Good.
I think that he made that case very powerfully and well, actually, and that we as a country, as it were, ought to think quite hard about whether that is sort of in our national interest and quite why we place such a value on that articulacy. So to that extent, he has a point. But I think the problem with his view is that it ignores that there were forces at work, and had been for years, that were encouraging people to become more and more sceptical about the European Union. Not least, in fact, possibly most importantly, pretty unrestrained immigration under Tony Blair's government.
Okay.
Because of a decision to allow anybody from the Eastern European countries in when Germany didn't.
But I mean, the criticism, though, of that debating style, etc., I mean, the Chancellor at the time was Roy Jenkins, and he said that the Oxford style at its worst is glib and flippant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
it is.
fair.
Yeah. Yeah. But bloody effective, though.
True.
You know, yes, it is. I mean, the truth is, in a way, PPE tutorials and Oxford Union debating encourage speed of thought, flexibility, willingness to take either position. So that, I mean, I remember, and it was an amazing training, and frankly, without it, I probably wouldn't be doing the job I am now. I do remember, actually, a slightly hilarious moment where there's an annual debate at the Oxford Union of no confidence in the government of the day. It's always is one, okay? The hilarious thing about this one was that the government minister who was there to talk, John Biffin, had to go to get the last train, and he'd not yet delivered his speech because rather rudely they'd allowed this event to overrun. But the person on the other side, who was the leader of the rail union, stayed because he had a chauffeur-driven car, as I remember. And as they announced this, I just saw a piece of paper move along. Sally will remember this sort of row of seats like in the House of Commons. I opened the piece of paper and it said, "You're on." And the president of the union said, "John Biffin unfortunately can't speak, but I'm delighted to say Nick Robinson, University College will," which was the first I knew I was going to speak. Now, that's not a bad training.
No.
To be able to stand a bit, God knows how many hundreds of people there were, but there were quite a lot, in order to do that.
Did you carry the day?
I haven't the
Can't
faintest
remember,
clue.
it didn't matter, yeah.
I just remember the fear of the piece of paper, no idea what I said or whether we carried it. So my argument is, you see, the slight difficulty with Simon's theory is Dan Hannan, for example, who was clearly very influential, was some years after Michael Gove and Boris Johnson. They weren't contemporaries. So there's sort of suggestion that if they'd not met each other, it's not quite right, because they weren't friends, allies, contemporaries.
Although he went to work for the ERG, was the first person who went to work for the ERG, wasn't he? So presumably... Yeah,
but the Cooper theory was that these three, as it were, university chums...
So I'm just... Before I get some questions, I was there at that time as well. I was there 1 year ahead of you. And people talk about, Westminster bubble, and they talk about Oxford, but I was completely and utterly ignorant of any of it. Literally any of it. The only person I met was Boris's future wife, because I knew her mother.
Yeah.
But I didn't meet Boris, and I wouldn't have known him, didn't know anything about anything going on at all, never set foot in the Oxford Union, had a very good time, I enjoyed myself. Yeah. And most people were more like me than you.
Oh, God, yeah. No, I was a freak.
Yeah, well, I didn't quite put it like that, but that's what everyone will remember. Oxford, around 80.
Oh, as if this is it, you mean?
Yes.
No, of course it isn't. It isn't. It was nevertheless a pretty extraordinary time. I mean, I'm a great believer in debating, and in fact, I work with a charity that tries to teach kids from deprived schools to debate on the grounds that teaching people articulacy is incredibly powerful.
I do the same.
And in fact,
I do.
In fact, one of the most moving things I've ever seen is giving an award to a young black girl from South London who said, before I learned to debate, I got repeatedly arrested by the police. And after I learned to debate, I was the one who reasoned with them and made the case for why my friends were being misunderstood, and then became a sort of police liaison figure in her community. So I genuinely, to this day, believe in the power of being able to make your case and argue and to be articulate. But it was an exciting period, because now if you go to the Oxford and Cambridge unions, there's a lot of celebrity booking. There's a lot of actors, sports people who come and give speeches. There aren't that many good debates. In my period, we did the morality of nuclear weapons, in which the Prime Minister of New Zealand flew in to make the speech that on his deathbed he said was the most important speech of his life, in which he argued to a Western audience. It was televised live in Australia and New Zealand, and in America, not live, but it was televised. He argued the case for a nuclear-free New Zealand, and he believed that the Oxford Union was the place to do that.
Okay.
I've still got the order paper, which sadly they pulled out on the day. I was meant to be debating with the American Star Wars negotiating team versus the Russian arms control negotiating team. It was only on the day that Moscow pulled them.
Wow, okay.
Yeah,
Well, you win
these
that round.
were there were some,
Okay, let's take
there were some quite big debates.
Take some questions. Anybody? So, yeah, and just say who you are.
I'm Wim Blanke, current president of the anesthesia section. I come originally from abroad. I'm now British. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
But if you talk about the importance of eloquence and being articulate, is it now becoming more clear compared to other countries where, in the current situation, the Prime Minister would have to resign through Parliament and through, let's say, terms of reference that they have to follow? That therefore eloquence has taken over from terms of reference in this country, which doesn't seem to exist or only belong to the party in power but not to Parliament.
Well, yes and no, because he might well go. So I think you're right that in a sense we've had a Prime Minister who has tested all the rules, all of the conventions, all of the assumptions of politics of my entire adult life. He's broken almost all of them and so far got away with it. But given that he now looks likely not to get away with it, it does look as if the checks and balances in the end operate. If you'd watched, and when you go home tonight, if you watch the 10 o'clock news, you'll see a little extract of this. There was a select committee hearing, it's called the liaison committee, all the chairs of all the select committees cross-examining the Prime Minister. It was brutal with him. I mean, not brutal as in rude or aggressive, but persistent, revealing, and ultimately devastating when he was asked questions like, do you know what the truth is? Do you think the truth matters? Do you think standards matter? So I think in the end, we've certainly seen that all put to the test. That's what happened. But I think it's worth reflecting. God knows why I'm speaking up for Boris Johnson, so I don't know. But I just think,
You're not feeling sorry for him,
partly, no, not Christ, no, not for a second. No, honestly, no.
Okay.
But I do think I'm always interested in sort of challenging the conventional wisdom. You've got to remember why he's there and why some people have tolerated it. And I do think there's a problem in this country that the other side have not looked at themselves in the mirror. Boris Johnson got the job and has stayed in the job because there is a very large swathe of opinion that believes that, call it the elite, call it the establishment, call it what you will, decided to defy the will of the people expressed in that referendum. Said they didn't really mean it. They were lied to. We ought to have another vote. Let's change the parliamentary rules on it. No, let's have a second referendum. So when Boris Johnson then did things that caused such offence to people, many, not all, defying Parliament or going against the Supreme Court, why do you think people backed him? Because their view was, you bloody well did it first. You did it to us. You told us it was our decision. You gave us the vote. We won fair and square. And then you said, no. And I do think as a country, we are deluding ourselves if we think the political mess we are in, and we are in that mess, there's no doubt, is all his fault. It isn't all his fault. It is the fault of people who decided that the process, isn't it, applies to both sides, only applied so long as they delivered the result that they believed in. And I do think people on both sides of that argument are guilty of that sort of, no, it's fine doing it because we were doing it because we're true Europeans. We're doing it for Britain's future. We're doing it, those aren't acceptable arguments.
And this is a kind of the good boys argument, it's sometimes said, isn't it? That
Good chaps
would, of either party would get together and somehow steer a middle road.
Well, Peter Hennessy, he was making a slightly
Hennessy.
subtler point, actually, if you forgive me, Simon. Peter Hennessy, the great constitutional historian, basically argued the good chaps principle, which is effectively, I will behave like a good chap because I know that in a year's time Simon might be Prime Minister and I need to know that he'll behave like a good chap because in the end, if I behave like a you-know-what and he does, then we're all worse off. So it was a sort of assumption. But essentially that compact was, I think, broken by the referendum because it forced people into binary choice. It forced them to make a choice when they had no information because there was no proper preparation by either side to explain to people the choices. it broke the model that what matters is the parliamentary system and what the government of the day does and what an election does. In many ways, it just broke all of the rules of politics. And if Boris Johnson goes tonight, if he may be gone already by the time we look at our phones.
I'm sure they'll tell us.
Somebody
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
If he goes, that will not instantly be repaired. That is damage that has been done to the political system that it will take years to repair, in my view. Rather sadly.
No?
Yeah, Nick, sorry, Howard Drake. I was a diplomat until a few years ago. Boris was my boss my last year, so. Can I just pick a couple of themes up?
Yeah.
You touched on. I was interested. I mean, you said at one point there, where's the effect of ultimately the system has worked? That we're going to get rid of the bastard somehow. Finally, the select committee, Simon, my old mate Simon went on all paying yesterday and all that sort of thing. It's kind of worked. Looking at the US with 6th of January and all of that, it kind of worked because Pence did the right thing, just.
Yeah.
But look at it now. Look at France, where, Macron is the sort of figure of the elite in the eyes of a lot of ordinary French people, but he's lost a lot of them completely. They might have voted for his president because they weren't sure about Le Pen and the other fellows. I mean, Mike, so the question, subscribing to the theory, it's not all about Boris. I mean, politics is a bit broken, isn't it?
Oh God, no, horribly.
Quite a lot of
I agree.
liberal democracies.
No, I think horribly broken.
It's taken, much as we would like to pin everything on Boris,
but
it is quite a problem here.
No, I think it's a huge problem and it terrifies me. It genuinely terrifies me. I think the United States was perilously close to tyranny in that sense. Well, first of all, you have to analyse what it is.
Yeah.
So part of the reason, and you probably noticed I get rather passionate about this. I mean, look, I live in Islington. What do you think most of the people I know voted? Yeah? But as it happens, I was involved in the Conservative Party when I was a student.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of the people I used to know. So I have this curious thing, which I had a 50th birthday party. I almost had to plead the two sides of my life not to talk to each other at one point because they both, wouldn't get. I said, "These are my friends. You be bloody nice to them. You can leave." Which was a funny moment at the party because I don't generally mix with politicians socially, but George Osborne was there, and one of my friends said, "Damn you, he's really nice, isn't he?" But part of my passion about this is that both sides simply want to blame the other. There's no self-reflection as to what's going on. And I think, and also there's this ridiculous Brito-centricness. It's all because of Brexit. What? Brexit is why Emmanuel Macron allowed won an election in which 41% of people voted for someone whose father denied the existence of the gas chambers.
Yeah.
That's Brexit's fault. Or that Donald Trump got elected. For goodness sake, ladies and gentlemen, lift your kind of eyes beyond the immediate. We think we know what the factors are, don't we? Which is declining real wages for most ordinary people over a sustained period of time, that the central offer of politics, which should be peace and prosperity, appeared to be broken because of the war on terror wasn't seen as a success. Terrorism came home. We can go through the ways in which politics seem to fail people, but if we don't ask those fundamental questions, together with social media, meaning that the idea that we just delegate to someone and say, look, come back to us in 5 years and tell us how you've done and we'll decide whether to kick you out, and that be utterly at odds with the idea that minute by minute by minute I can express my view and choose a preference and be an instant consumer, and that there's no attempt to reform politics to reflect some of that change in consumerism and in the marketplace. These are the factors, or Boris Johnson or even the Brexit referendum. Much bigger factors at play, in my mind.
Let's get back to you. We'll allow Roger a question in a second, but you mentioned George Osborne, who your family said was very nice. Now, he interviewed you, as I recall, and his very first question was...
Should never have agreed to that.
Yes, no, you shouldn't, should you? You shouldn't. But his first question was, why are you so ambitious?
Indeed.
So...
Did he ask a question? Or did
No, that was...
There's no technique there.
No, there's no technique at all. No, at all. No.
No, I'm doing the technique. You didn't ask a question, so I'm not answering it.
Oh, okay.
Are you asking me to answer that question?
Yes, I am, yes.
Why am I so ambitious?
I knew this would hurt. Go
I
on.
don't think I came up with a very good answer then, did I?
No, I was hoping you'd rehearsed it now.
Good God. I don't, the honest answer is I don't know. I mean, look, I don't want to give this answer because I think it's balls. No, look, look, I'm hesitating. No, I'm hesitating not because I don't want to say things, but because, I should be in the psychiatrist's chair. There are some people, and I'm not sure they're the people who know me best, who know, as Simon does, that I was in a fatal car crash when I was 18. Mm-hmm. 2 of my friends died, and it sort of slightly focuses the mind and all that, And I was pretty driven, but I think I was pretty driven. The reason I hesitated was I think I was pretty driven before that. And I don't honestly really have the explanation for that.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at people are ambitious because they're lonely. Well, I wasn't lonely, or because they're unhappy. Well, I wasn't unhappy. I had a happy childhood. So, in other words, I'm genuinely intrigued by the answer, but I'm not sure I've got it.
Okay. Well, maybe he was just wrong.
What? Oh, right.
Maybe George.
Oh, no, I was bloody ambitious.
Oh, okay.
I was driven.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I think the accident, in a way, altered my life quite, in a way you would expect it to. My best friend died in the crash.
And it was, it's perfectly okay to ask you. It was more than your best friend.
I can't promise not to get emotional, but yes.
Okay.
No, it's fine.
But, he was the son of a person I grew up with, Brian Redd of the Today programme, who, said, you have the nation listening in your ear, what you say every morning.
That's right.
So it was...
Well, he was my inspiration. Is the reason I'm a journalist. There's no journalism in my family. The reason I wanted to be a journalist is because my best friend's dad was Brian Redd. As it happened, his house was on my route home, rather like me now, because he did these weird hours, was often home in the afternoons. So from the age of 8 to 18, I'd probably be in that house 2-3 times a week. I'd pop in. I remember as an 8-year-old going and having a slice of chocolate cake and a glass of milk, seeing the Guardian and the Daily Mail on the kitchen.
Manchester Guardian.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Good.
On the kitchen. Well, it was a breakfast bar for some reason. I remember I sat on a stool with my legs dangling, and suddenly thought it was a bit weird. A house with a Mail and the Guardian, And Brian was just interested in ideas. So that was where the inspiration to be a journalist came from.
Right.
And the drive to do the job I now do is I'm now doing my best friend's dad's job.
How does that feel?
On the day I did it, it was pretty hard to speak.
Okay. I don't normally ask questions like that.
Yeah. No, look, it's a huge honour is what I wanted to do. I was delighted to do it. But I won't forget, I wasn't actually in Brian Redhead's chair because the studio, I don't mean literally in the chair, but I wasn't in his place because the studio, as it happened, had moved buildings.
Yeah.
But boy, it felt like it.
It was all down in the basement, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had to, you've all, ladies and gentlemen, you must have all had moments where but there was a sort of gulp moment.
Yeah.
And I just thought, hold on, it's a job, it's just another job, do the job. But it was.
Okay.
Felt quite a lot was hovering overhead.
You tell me another story which you said was okay to ask you about, that you very recently met someone who'd been in hospital with you.
Yeah, that was an extraordinary thing, actually. I gave a talk elsewhere, and at the end of this talk, this chap came up. And usually people come and, either slag off the BBC or are nice about you and want to know what you think. And this guy said, I was in the burns unit with you in 1982. And remembered me giving him a pep talk about how he'd get better. Yeah, because I was used a bit because I was young, and usually people in burns unit are not. You will know, if you get flash burns to your face, they actually recover incredibly quickly, but you look dreadful to start with. I went from patient to patient. I can't quite believe I did this, but apparently I did. At the age of 18, saying, look at me, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's going to be all right. Which was
the story.
But that was quite a moment.
Okay. Yeah. Let's change the subject before you get me going. So I would never do. Yeah. So you have this podcast, Political Thinking, which is very good, really good, very, very good indeed. And I still have 2 questions to ask you. One is, I've got one more quiz question. Okay?
Yes.
So you actually mentioned Anthony Clare in the psychiatrist's chair, and I did warn you I'd ask you this question, but was that he told me that of all the people he'd interviewed, there were only 2 that he didn't like. Just 2.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could work out who they were.
Oh, good God, he did it for years, Simon.
He did. I'll give you a clue.
Go on.
They both came from Yorkshire.
Geoffrey Boycott.
That's number 1, Geoffrey Boycott. He didn't like him at all. Who was number 2?
Does anybody... Oops, sorry. Not that I've ever met him. I've got no personal...
The whole audience has to think.
Yorkshire.
Okay. No, not Harold. Harold Wilson was dead, but even Auntie Claire wasn't around that long. Wasn't...
Who is it?
Who, come on in. Well done.
Ah, well done.
Jimmy Savile. This was years ago.
Oh, well, good judgment.
Yeah.
That is good. That is good.
And he said he thought this was years before Savile was unravelled, as it were. And I remember him telling me, just 20 years ago, that he thought he was sinister. He just said he thought he was
Very
sinister.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
then,
yes.
Of the people, you've had 184 people
God,
on
have I
your
really?
podcast. Yes,
Have I?
yeah.
Jeez.
Who haven't
Done
you
your good
liked?
research. Actually, it's not... I don't think...
It's
I
an
genuinely,
unfair question.
I
but,
genuinely don't think there's people I've come away and thought, I really don't like you, you know. Sometimes you're just fantastically disappointed.
okay.
Because you just think there are interesting stories to tell. For those who don't know, this is a sort of half-hour interview, which is designed, as it were, to get people's backstories to discuss. It's like I sometimes say, Desert Island Discs without the discs. And not just politicians, as people who influence political thinking. So it could be writers, we've done Jim Mercurio or Armando and
we've had him.
or Ian Hislop and so on.
Mm.
So the frustration, and what you're trying to do is literally trying to help people tell their stories. And a bit like Simon's doing now, I'm interested to see what makes people tick. Why are they the way that they are? And the thing I'm proudest of about the programme is that most often people say, I really didn't like that person, and now you've made me kind of think again. And I want that to be the case because I think politicians, as you do, Simon, are generally a lot better than people think now. So, anyway, I've evaded your question. Well, I think I told you on when you briefly asked me this. Just as a disappointment was Dominic Raab. He's got a very interesting story.
Yes.
His father is a Czech Jewish refugee. So, Dominic worked as a Foreign Office human rights lawyer in the Palestinian territories. I don't think either of these things you would think. No. And I found myself...
I'm making this up, but it's true. It's absolutely true, yeah.
I found myself telling his story better than he did. And I just thought, what an incredible waste. You know, here we are, you've been given the opportunity to tell it.
For those who haven't known, your interview with Nadine Dorries is very good. She's a person it's quite easy not to like.
Yeah.
But actually, there was a lot that was likeable about her and made much more sense.
Well, because I think... You didn't text me today about Nadine Dorries. Somebody texted me today because I've had so many texts because of politics.
I'm sure
I've forgotten. Who had just heard the Nadine Dorries interview and went, I've got it. Because she said about Boris that he liked her. And this person said, if you listen to her story, real poverty, abuse at the hands of Catholic Church in a Catholic school, which she generally refuses to talk about, but clearly alludes to it having happened, a divorce, growing up in Liverpool as a Tory when you were despised as a Tory, etc.
Yeah.
What this person said to me is, he's the first person who liked her.
Interesting.
You know, no wonder she's fantastically loyal to him. Someone liked her.
And she did reply to an Etonian.
It's not literally the first person.
Well,
That's ridiculous, but you take my point.
Yeah. Somebody said that working class people don't know how to write letters, and she just replied on Twitter saying, "You're a wanker," which I thought was. Still, I thought, well, you know.
Well, there we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who here knew that she has sold 2.5 million books?
Yes.
As a novelist.
Yeah.
There we are. You see, you're going to have to listen to political.
You must know the line about Barbara Carden, though, don't you? She was on. I don't know why, but it should be you. I'll have to finish the story. She was on Newsnight with another author, and I can't remember. So the author had just published another book, and it was her 30th. And then Barbara Carden said, "Well, I've written 176," and Paxton said, "Is that one a year then?" Anyway,
Good old
right
Jeremy.
now then, that wasn't. So I mean, I was So you also have you got a lot of publicity for Martin Lewis, for some revelations he made. But you said one thing that's, and you know what I'm going to say, because other people said it, but you said something that did surprise me.
Yeah.
You've already mentioned you've got a Jewish background, I have a Jewish background as well, as does Martin Lewis. And you said that there was a connection between being Jewish and being an expert in saving money. And I have to say...
No.
Wasn't it that? Okay.
No.
It was
Go on with the question.
All right, it was
no,
similar.
I would never dream of saying that.
All right, what did you say then? It was something similar.
Look, I don't know the exact words.
Yeah.
No, I said, had it worried him to be a money-saving expert
Yeah.
when he... I mean, there was
enough.
context. This didn't come out of nowhere.
No, I know.
I told the story of how he was one of only 2 Jewish boys at school, about his nickname was Jew.
Yeah.
And Jewy Louis.
That's right.
And things like that. I got him to talk about that. He said he didn't regard that as anti-Semitism. He regarded it as different standards of the day. He never felt he'd particularly suffered. And I was interested to what extent being the outsider had shaped who he was. Because he's both fantastically successful, like lots of successful people, quite fragile. Visibly, audibly in that interview, I think.
Yes.
Quite fragile.
Yes, he was,
seems
yeah.
close to tears at times. Seems rather angry at other times. So I was just intrigued as to whether presenting himself as the money-saving expert, the fact he was Jewish had ever made him think, oh, God, I don't want to call myself the money-saving expert, because I thought it was interesting. And he said, you're being very brave. Now, he may have meant brave in a yes minister sense, but you're being very brave. Only my Jewish friends ask me that.
Yeah.
Nobody else has had the courage to do it in public.
Okay.
We've just had an official complaint about it.
Have you?
Not from him.
Well, no,
He's all right about
he
it.
wouldn't do that. No, okay.
He's all right about it, but
there
I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I must admit, it did catch me. Yeah, it did a little bit. It did. Okay. Roger, you're the president, so you don't get questions. So, you got the Jimmy Savile right, so you do.
Oh, thanks. So I saw Boris once. I was having lunch at a restaurant in London, and I was struck by he's obviously an intelligent man, Oxbridge and all that he told us, but how, I don't want to use the word dense, but how he just couldn't take himself around the room. So he was having lunch, and also I was interested, because he was still giving it to Boris when it was just him and 2 others, I guess, advisors. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not a big audience, quite a quiet person, he was still in the mode.
As Prime Minister or years ago?
No, this was before actually, it's about a year before.
Yeah.
So you're probably working up to it. But I thought, a couple of things. First of all, is he just always like that? Research, I'm something not about that, but it seems when he's in the public eye, he just constantly.
Yeah.
But also, he just couldn't leave the room. So they left ahead of him, and then he nearly walked into our table and couldn't put his jacket on. And this interested me in a few ways.
Couldn't put it on what?
Just doing the buttons
Oh,
all
so-
along his suit jacket.
Yeah.
I just thought he's obviously dyspraxic in
Yeah.
terminology. And he obviously has areas of his brain which work better than others. But I don't know how to phrase this, but where do you think it all went wrong for Boris? He went to Oxford, it was set up, but where did it go wrong?
If you're slightly careful of this question, you know the old George Best story, don't you?
Yeah. That's what we're all
Do you not
thinking
know
about.
that story?
No, tell me.
All right, your turn.
Famously, George Best told the story to Michael Parkinson.
Yeah.
When he was in football decline, but was one of the most famous sportsmen on the planet, he's in the hotel, the Europa Hotel in Belfast. Miss World is lying on the bed, on a bed filled with cash. And a little Irish guy, I don't know why it's relevant, he's little, but it's a little tiny Irish guy, comes in with a trolley of champagne and goes, looks at Miss World, ignores her, says to George, "Where on earth did it go wrong, George?"
Yeah.
And George used to tell this story. It's sort of great. So what way? It's not gone wrong. He's a bloody Prime Minister, isn't he?
He knows how to use people to
yeah.
get where he wants, which I'm sure lots of people have done before him, but how has he not been intelligent enough to see it was going a bit wrong and start changing his behaviour such that it wouldn't all go wrong? Do you see what I mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, I suspect there are people in here who've had patience like that. I mean, in other words, aren't there 2 answers to that, I think? I mean, there may be deeper psychological answers, which I'm not well qualified to give. But one answer is, it's always worked up till now.
Yeah.
And lots of us underestimated him. I certainly never thought he'd be Prime Minister, because I thought these flaws were always evident. But it has always worked through every part of his career. He's always managed to bluff his way through every crisis. and got away with it because he has other qualities and talents and skills, as we were discussing. And the second thing is, if he admits a mistake once, the whole thing unravels. I mean, what do? You see, today's a really interesting example, or yesterday. He does an interview in which he calls in my successor as political editor, Chris Mason, and admits to the one thing that nobody was asking him, which is he shouldn't have appointed this guy. When the answer is, well, why did you lie about him? Because if he says, look, I didn't tell the truth, then what do you say? Can I have 5,000 other things taken into consideration? Where does that end? And his whole setup has always been to never apologise, never explain, to believe that if you do, just more and more, as it were, shit comes out, and just keep forward momentum. I bumped into the other day, I have to be slightly coded, I'm afraid, but somebody who was a kind of senior civil servant working alongside him, one of the many who'd fallen by the wayside, who said to me it was extraordinary that he would take calls from Boris, who appeared, and I don't mean literally suicidal, it's an expression, who appeared, very, very down. He would then, this individual would then carry this through the night, deeply anxious. I mean, first of all, try and build him up, tell him to feel better, don't worry, it'll be better in the morning. Would live all night with this, would spend the whole of the next day, and then discover, just gone. Boris would bounce in and he was absolutely fine, he's moved on to the next thing. And this guy's whole week had been ruined by this emotional kind of load that had been put on him. And I just think the only way he's been able to cope now, the psychologists amongst you will probably be interested in the fact that, it is alleged in the biography that his father beat his mother and his mother was then mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
I think about how you confront.
That's a description of some of our jobs. There's a lot going on there. Is that what we get paid to do?
Yeah, quite.
Let's move to the final topic then. You also created quite people notice you writing in the Radio Times, and we've been arguing for politicians, and I still believe it's an honourable profession. British politicians are not corrupt compared to plenty of other countries. They work bloody hard. Most of them don't make high office, and actually, as long as they know that you're not taping them, they can be very witty and very funny and very good company. And you generally agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you then wrote, you said it was harder and harder. It became harder to argue, or to make that case, I think you said. Harder to defend the system. This is a quote, so MPs have responded to scandals by seeking to defend their own or damage their enemies. That was from the Radio Times. So extrapolate or expand a bit.
Yeah, well, what I was thinking is I used to always say that I was the sort of bore in the back of a cab who, when a London cabbie would say, they're all the same, mate, aren't they? They're all in it for themselves, they're all on the same. If I had the energy, I'd go, well, that's absolutely not true. Yeah. And I would have that argument. They're not all on the take, many of them, blah, blah, the argument that you've just made. And I wrote that piece because I was appalled, and I remain appalled, by the willingness of people coming on my programme to defend the indefensible. And I don't think that was true 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 years ago. People who would simply say black was white. Mm. I'm not going to... I tell you what, this is a sort of slightly... I'm wary of this because it sounds pious and slightly self-aggrandising, but I thought, I'm damned if I'm going to bloody well defend you if you can't do me and the people who I broadcast to the courtesy of doing your best to tell the truth. And I'm angry about it.
Now, Justin Welby, who you interviewed, he said that, and also we've interviewed as well, lovely man. He said that it wasn't that politicians have got worse, he just said it was that standards have got higher. Their expectation, and he said no 19th century politician would have survived a week in our modern system, that they were capable of far worse.
Well, I'm sure they were. And look, and we in a sense go full circle to the question you used to, with that quote, very nice quote about Balfour that you had, which I must borrow from you. Yes, of course, people in previous eras whether it's on sex or bullying or money or... Of course, there were much worse things happened and many people didn't know because, frankly, they didn't even know the deputy to the Home Secretary was, let alone know what behaviour that person had, etc., etc. That's not the point I was trying to make. I don't mean that this is a uniquely bad generation. My point was, if, and forgive me, it goes back to your point about whether this, and yours, Howard, about whether the system has worked. If Parliament won't stand up for its own values, and it won't stand up for truth, I'm buggered if I will.
Okay,
frankly.
we're coming towards the end, so go on, Rog, you can ask a question now.
Well, I just wanted, it's a bit of a plug for next week where we've got
I was
We're
gonna do
Streeting. It's been so Boris.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer, Lisa Nandy and Wes Streeting, they've got a difficult task facing this guy. So just from their side of things, have they got it right? Is Starmer boring? Should he be replaced?
Well, have they got it right? In a way, if he goes, we start again, don't we? Whoever the new leader is will try and present themselves as a new Conservative government in the way that Boris Johnson tried to present himself as a new Conservative government. The thing that Starmer has obviously got spectacularly right, much more than I think people realised. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn may be barred from standing at the next election. So in terms of the agenda of, is the Labour Party weighed down by the perception of A, anti-Semitism, B, not being patriotic, C, being far left? Well, I mean, it's extraordinary the speed with which that, if you accept it is a problem has been dealt with, and that there is relative unity in the party. It's not a deeply divided party. So the issue then becomes twofold, doesn't it? Has he got the charisma on the one hand? Evidently not, and he's not going to suddenly develop it. If you talk to people who were at the bar with him, or people who served, they all tell the same story, which is, a friend of mine put it this way, is when I faced Keir in the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, I didn't sleep a wink. I thought I'd probably lose. But if I faced him with a jury, I opened champagne. Now, you don't suddenly develop the skills with the jury that he's never had. Have you heard a version of this story?
Yeah, no, I hadn't at all. It's very good.
But you don't suddenly discover those skills. He doesn't have those skills. He just hasn't got them. And he's not going to get them, in my view. But his much bigger problem, which goes back to the much deeper question you were asking about, the problem with politics, what is the solution to the country's problems? What is the plan? What is the critique? Well, we know the critique is it's a rubbish government, right? We can all do. That's not me speaking.
No,
BBC. That's the critique in inverted commas. And they're nowhere near giving an answer to that. And they will. That, in my view, and I think that's where Blair is right, is much more important than Keir's charisma. If he had a plan that sounded like, bloody hell, if we had somebody in office, that would make a difference. But that is, a profound challenge for people. We've got a state that is, this combination that we now have of a state that is bigger than ever, higher taxes, higher borrowing, higher spending than in British history, but with poor quality public services, deteriorating. This is a terrifyingly difficult challenge, because for 20 years, people said, well, look, if only we spent like the Europeans, then we'd have really good public services. We are spending like the Europeans. We're spending big time. Now, of course, partly distorted by the pandemic, and so on. But there's some pretty fundamental questions asked, ladies and gentlemen, about the health service, for example, and how it will work in a cash-starved society, and what sort of change will be brought about. Now, I think the interesting thing about Wes Streeting, compared with, say, Keir Starmer, is that Wes Streeting is more willing to answer those questions than Keir Starmer. So that when Keir Starmer was on my podcast, I got him to talk about, he was clearly profoundly affected by the long-term illness of his mother, who was extremely seriously unwell. And the fact he effectively cared for her for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And he was moved. He told me his final conversation. She gripped his hand and said, whatever you do, don't let your dad go private. Now, that's extraordinary. I mean, she was a nurse, to be fair. Had been a nurse. But, I mean, I was one of those. I thought it was extraordinary, A, that she thought it and said it as her last thing, virtually to her son. I thought it was even more extraordinary and showed how deeply politically naive he is, that he said it publicly. The whole point about the Labour Party is they don't need to appeal to people who love the NHS, they need to appeal to people who might go private. The whole point. And therefore to say that, to sort of, my God, it's a terrible offence if you go private, struck me as politically lunatic. But Wes was much more open when I said to him, Tony Blair introduced the use of private hospitals to clear backlogs in, I forget what they were called, the treatment centres, weren't they? I forget where you got your hips and, you got simple surgery was done.
Yeah.
Are you open to that? And he said, damn right I am. Now, I'm not saying these are right or wrong or either ethically, but I'm pretty sure I know politically which is the right answer for the Labour Party. Of course.
Lisa Nandy?
You can't do a follow-up. It's not fair.
Shut up,
Yeah. So, Nick, we've run out of time. And first to say, I'm amazed...
Has he gone yet?
Well, I don't know. Has he gone?
No,
still
not yet.
not.
How do you
Okay.
tell? Have you got a special alarm on your phone?
Yeah.
I looked 2 minutes ago.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not there.
All right, last question then.
I've got a
Do you
message from
think-
Jeremy Hunt.
We all get messages from Jerry Hunt around here.
Yeah.
So that doesn't
Well, you
count.
all love him,
We
I know.
do. Well, actually, no, I do like him, actually. We did a very nice interview with him as well.
Yes.
Which was your favourite interview that you've done? We've got to stop, actually, as we're over time. But go on, which is your favourite? Which one should they listen to tonight?
Oh, of those political thinkers?
Yeah.
Oh, good God, Simon, this is impossible.
I know, but
Choose one.
choose one.
Well, sorry?
I was going to say, what about your most challenging?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll do the favourite ones in mind. It's not necessarily a favourite, actually, but I do think the first time I did Keir Starmer, because he'd not told any of these stories before,
okay.
I thought was a sort of, got much. The thing, I'll tell you the story. If I can, I've got 2 minutes to tell you the story.
It's up to you, but
1
yes.
minute to tell you the story, which is this.
They're all happy.
It's one of those moments where, for once, I did behave like Anthony Clare. So I'd read this story, so I didn't get it out of him, but I read this story and he got it to relay, of the fact that he lived in this. It wasn't quite a squat, but it was obviously, utterly chaotic. And that he, Keir, on one occasion, his flatmate came home to encounter a man coming down the stairs carrying their television, in other words, a thief. When he got upstairs, Keir was tapping away at his computer, had not noticed the television being stolen from under his nose. Now, earlier in the interview, Keir had described a pretty chaotic home that he was brought up in. His parents kept donkeys in the garden. There were holes in the exterior walls, which were never repaired. This is not evidence of chaos, what I'm going to say, but it was a difficult home. His mother was very seriously ill. His brother had learning difficulties. Keir was the star who sort of looked after everybody. His dad, he had a very difficult relationship with. And when I heard that, he relayed this story about the burglar and he laughed. And I said, I've got it. And he said, what do you mean? He said, that's how you coped, isn't it? That's how you cope when you grew up. You could just zone out. And it was a lovely moment in the interview because he went, oh, nobody's ever said that before. Do you think so? And I went, yes. And the joy of doing those interviews, I'm sure it's the joy of your job, Sally's job.
Yeah.
Other people, is you occasionally get those moments. You go,
You do?
that's it.
Although you don't normally share them with 100,000
No,
people.
no, you don't normally share
That was
them. So
Jeremy
I
Hunt
think-
saying you're doing very well.
So
Right.
I think my favourite ever. Oh, I'm going to give one last thing.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Because you deserve to be entertained now. You've come all this way. My favourite ever, which I'm sorry is my classic after dinner speech, but you might as well have it, is asking George Bush a question. So I had a series of run-ins with George Bush. I kept going, travelling with Tony Blair in the build-up to the Iraq War and afterwards, and I got the first question every time because it's a sort of weird convention where the BBC guy gets the first question. And had quite a proper run-ins, I asked him at one news conference whether he was in denial about the Iraq War, and he started to kind of finger stab me, and kept coming back every answer he did because I was the first question he'd go, and you, sir, should understand. Anyway, I went back a few months later with Gordon Brown for his first visit to Camp David, And and I thought, I can't have another row. I can't do it. I've just got to be boring this time. Put my hand up, said Nick Robinson, BBC News, and George Bush said, "You still hanging around?" He said, "Well, Mr. President, thank you for that warm welcome to your country." And I can't remember what it was. It was an incredibly anodyne question. He looked a bit bored. Anyway, at the end of the news conference, which I should explain was outside Camp David, in the blazing Maryland sunshine, and they'd not warned us, so I had neither sun cream nor a hat. So by the end of the news conference, I'm doing this, bright red like a bleach beacon. And Gordon Brown and George Bush are doing their photo op, what they call in the business a grip and grin, where you grip someone's hand and you grin for the camera. It's grip and grin. Right, they're doing their grip and grin. And George Bush catches my eye doing this. And he goes, "Next time, you should cover your bald head." This is literally on live television right around the world. It's quite a big deal, this thing. And then he turns round to walk towards Marine One, which is the presidential helicopter and is their photo opportunity. And as he turns round, I've got that awful sense like the little kid in school who's been naughty, except the people staring at me are not my schoolmates, but like the director of the FBI and the head of the CIA and all that sort of. And I sort of muttered, or thought I muttered, "I didn't know you cared." And Bush is walking with Brown and he turns around and goes, "I don't." Which has been played on Have I Got News For You a number of times.
Nick, it's amazing you spent, of this evening of all others, you came to spend it with us. I mean, everyone is
I have quite a
incredibly
lot
grateful.
of reason to be grateful.
Yes, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was fabulous. Thank you. Good.
I was just saying under my breath, I've got quite good reasons over the years to be grateful to doctors.
Oh, so, true. But we're very grateful for you coming. That was fabulous.
Good.
We could have gone on for hours,
for...
but we're not going to.
Lovely.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
You so
Cheers.
much.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.